Greenland in 1959, near the North Pole, heavy loads inched across the ice at 2 miles per hour. The United States planned to turn this icy wasteland into a nuclear fortress. They intended to station missiles there, no matter the immense cost. The U.S. government even proposed purchasing Greenland from Denmark. This offer came shortly after the conclusion of World War II. The proposed price was $100 million in gold. 200 soldiers were expected to live within the city built beneath the ice. As the Cold War intensified, the U.S. aimed to demonstrate its military prowess to the Soviets. However, this underground settlement was merely a facade for a far more ambitious and clandestine American military project. This segment of the icy Cold War between East and West sounds like a plot from a spy thriller. But this incredible story is entirely true. It is absolutely true. Soren Gregerson was just 18 years old, fresh out of high school. He became an eyewitness to this unusual project, meticulously documenting his experiences in a diary. He also captured several photographs of the site. I was officially invited to Camp Century by the U.S. Army. A nuclear reactor was planned to supply the underground town with both heat and electricity. This vital component became operational on the 2nd of October, 1960. Following World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union fiercely competed for global supremacy. It was a relentless race characterized by emerging technologies and increasingly deadly weaponry. The intense Cold War between the East and the West was well underway. In 1950, Soviet assistance enabled the Chinese to successfully repel Western forces in Korea. In 1957, a triumphant Soviet Union celebrated the 40th anniversary of the October Revolution. These grand celebrations signaled the dawn of an entirely new era. The Red Army used the May Day parade to prominently display its advanced new military technology. The Soviet Union had just successfully completed the first intercontinental missile tests. This left American efforts significantly behind. Furthermore, the Communists successfully launched the first satellites into Earth's orbit. The year 1957 proved to be a period of extreme difficulty for the USA. For a full 3 weeks, the satellite Sputnik broadcast an audible signal across the entire globe. America was compelled to acknowledge this significant achievement. The world watched in sheer amazement as the Soviets appeared to be winning the space race. Their monumental success served as the most effective propaganda the communist leadership could have possibly desired. In November of that same year, the United States faced yet another considerable setback. Sputnik 2 carried the first living creature into orbit, a dog named Laika. The entire world followed the canine's journey through space, another undeniable victory for the communist regime. American attempts to counter the Soviet success and finally launch their own satellite ended in complete failure. Despite this profound humiliation, the American public remained supportive of their president. To actively push back against the communist threat, Eisenhower implemented a strategy of nuclear deterrence. May the turbulence of our age yield to the true time of peace, when men and nations shall share a life that honors the dignity of each. Consequently, the United States turned its strategic focus towards Greenland. Positioned exactly halfway between Washington and Moscow, American missiles could strike their Soviet targets. This offered considerably greater accuracy. U.S. government officials began to recognize that Arctic regions would play a vital role. This was especially true in the context of the emerging Cold War, leading them to believe it would be advantageous. It would be much easier if they could completely control Greenland. However, Greenland was actually part of the Kingdom of Denmark. The Danes initially rejected the American offer but subsequently approved the construction of a substantial U.S. airbase. In an impressive display of logistical capability, American soldiers completed the construction of their airbase at Thule in just 3 months. Amphibious vehicles were effectively utilized as ferries to rapidly unload the arriving supply ships. This was arguably the most extensive engineering undertaking ever seen in the Arctic. The United States dispatched considerable cargo and many thousands of personnel to Thule. Their objective was to establish an air base capable of accommodating large nuclear bombers. Approximately 12,000 people were stationed there. The airbase was constructed under strict secrecy, and the Air Force struggled to find sufficient personnel willing to reside in this extremely remote part of the world. Chuck Rose, a military doctor, received orders to serve his country in this harsh, freezing wasteland. And so I just received my orders. It stated that I was going to Thule Air Base. I asked, "Where is that?" The sergeant who answered the phone began to laugh uncontrollably. I asked, "What is so funny?" He replied, "That's the worst place in the world." He added, "You're going to live under the ice for an entire year, and you'll never get out to see the sun." In 1959, however, the United States initiated an even more complex undertaking not far from Thule. This ambitious new venture was designated as Camp Century. At this new location, the U.S. intended to conduct crucial tests on both personnel and materials essential for deploying nuclear missiles. But precisely where within this immense polar desert should Camp Century be established? Creating a human settlement nearly 100 feet beneath the ice surface had never been attempted before. It was an unprecedented challenge. Colonel Kirkering, the commander of the U.S. Army's Polar Research Center, was ultimately selected to lead this significant project. And then you would have many thousands of kilometers of tunnels under the ice with railroads. Along these railroads, nuclear missiles could be transported back and forth between numerous launch sites. The U.S. Army invested substantial financial resources and effort into the creation of the very first subterranean military base in the Arctic. Shipments soon began their slow crawl up the newly constructed road towards the ice cap. From there, they were transferred to sleds for onward transport to Camp Century. The entire operation was meticulously filmed in color. This footage would later be shared with the public to showcase the impressive strength and capabilities of the American military. We referred to these convoys of 10 to 20-ton sleds as heavy swings. They were crawling up the ice cap at approximately 2 miles per hour. A heavy swing would typically reach the camp in about 70 hours, assuming everything proceeded smoothly. Powerful Caterpillar tractors equipped with extra-wide treads were used to pull these heavy swings. Each individual tractor possessed the capability to haul between 50 and 100 tons. Finally, much like a wagon train from the Old West, the initial heavy swing commenced its journey. It was still officially summer when the extremely harsh Arctic winter began to set in. Construction work would soon have to be temporarily halted. Fortunately, the workers already had a designated place to gather, rest, and unwind. Camp Century was designed to be constructed approximately 100 feet below the surface. The glacier beneath this location is nearly a mile thick. Engineers meticulously constructed the tunnel system from above. To achieve this, they first had to excavate 23 separate trenches. The central trench served as the main artery, with side channels branching off for living quarters and various essential technical facilities. A compact nuclear reactor was intended to provide the settlement with both electricity and heating. The specialized snowplows utilized had been procured from Switzerland, where they are employed to clear mountain passes during the winter season. At Camp Century, the digging operations continued deeper and deeper into the snowpack. Within a matter of hours, metal arches were erected to form sturdy roofs for the tunnels. These structures were then covered with snow, effectively camouflaging them from the outside world. The construction crews worked continuously around the clock, operating in 12-hour shifts. Thanks to the continuous daylight of the Arctic summer, this pace was easily maintained. The nighttime hours were just as bright as the daytime. Due to the persistent sunlight, the workers experienced significant issues with headaches and a lack of sleep. They then get hidden by snow, making them invisible to the outside. Construction crews are busy 24 hours a day, working in shifts of 12 hours each. The Arctic summer makes this simple, as daylight lasts throughout the night. With continuous daylight, the workers frequently suffer from sleeplessness and severe headaches. The military ensures its personnel are well-fed. Generous, double-sized meals are provided daily to boost their morale. 100 individuals reside in the construction encampment, which will need to be dismantled once the underground city is fully established. Each completed tunnel is marked with black flags, soon to be completely covered by years of fresh snow. During the summer of 1960, the personnel commence constructing the camp's interior. Prefabricated residences, specifically engineered for Arctic climates, are erected upon a foundation of wooden planks. Every dwelling was constructed and verified in the United States. They are equipped with heating and special insulation. A single kit can be put together within a day. The entrances are sealed off with blocks of snow. Maintaining this temperature is crucial for the passages to remain structurally sound. 15 men are assigned to each house, with 3 houses accommodated in the lateral tunnels. Approximately 200 individuals in total will inhabit the encampment. Snow blocks are then used to seal off these entrances. This renders Camp Century entirely concealed from the outside world. The blocks interlock, reinforcing the stability of the wall. A narrow passage provides access for entry and exit. Each tunnel is equipped with an emergency shaft. Only the uppermost parts of Camp Century are visible above ground. The Army makes sure that life at the construction site is documented on film, especially the enjoyable aspects. This documentary footage will be broadcast on American television as promptly as feasible. The Army intends to demonstrate the lengths it will go to safeguard the American populace, even in the most severe and unwelcoming regions on Earth. Their thinking was that if, for any reason, the nuclear risk to the mainland United States became excessively high, people might choose to reside in these protected subterranean cities or other secure locations. At least that was the explanation provided. However, the opposing side is equally skilled in employing propaganda. While the United States constructs its nuclear stronghold in Greenland, Nikita Khrushchev becomes the inaugural Soviet leader to tour the adversary's territory. The most influential figure within the Iron Curtain brings his entire family along, as a New York newspaper stated, including his son, Sergei. In September 1959, Sergei was 24 years old. He is the party leader's sole son. Currently, he resides in the United States. Previously, under Soviet propaganda, we held the belief that life in the West was significantly worse than our own circumstances, of course, so it was a shock to discover the reality was the opposite. Khrushchev skillfully poses for photographs and orchestrates a display for the communist bloc. He astonishes his hosts by presenting a replica of a medal that the Soviets had previously launched into space. He endeavors to unnerve the Americans by boasting about Moscow's vast nuclear arsenal, which they claimed could strike the United States at any moment. His focus was on the missiles, representing a genuine potential to reach American soil. However, we did not possess such missiles at that particular time. Consequently, he fabricated this notion of a missile gap, posing a threat to Americans. It was a deceptive tactic. Khrushchev's missile bluff stands as a brilliant maneuver in global politics. The Cold War is also characterized by verbal conflicts. By the conclusion of his 2-week sojourn in the United States, the party leader had amply served his nation's interests. I recall him stating that we produced missiles with the same ease as making sausages. And I responded by asking how he could assert that, given we only had 5 missiles. His reply was that the exact number of missiles we possessed was irrelevant because it was crucial if we intended to initiate conflict. However, my objective was to avert war, and I wanted the Americans to perceive us as sufficiently powerful, considerably more so than we actually were. The true strength of the Soviet Union remained, for the United States, the paramount question of that era. A reconnaissance aircraft is dispatched to gather intelligence on Soviet military capabilities. The U-2 aircraft operates at an altitude of 20 miles, far beyond the reach of enemy anti-aircraft weaponry. At least, that was the assessment from the Pentagon. U-2 pilots routinely infiltrate Soviet territory, uncovering numerous secret military installations. Furthermore, they expose the falsity of Khrushchev's extensive claims of nuclear superiority. Every intelligence-gathering flight constituted a blatant violation of international law, and thus required the explicit approval of the U.S. President. In May 1960, a single American pilot did not return. He had been shot down by one of the Soviet Union's newly developed surface-to-air missiles, and miraculously survived the incident. He was scheduled for a trial in Moscow, and the Eisenhower administration also faced scrutiny. When we publicly acknowledged ownership of the U-2 and its reconnaissance mission, we were engaged in an activity that, in the contemporary world, was the sole method for us to acquire information from a secluded, opaque society. Nevertheless, the United States soon retaliated in this propaganda struggle. At the United Nations, they unveiled a listening device discovered within the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. This served as evidence of Soviet deception. The Marine Fiddler, a cargo vessel, arrives at Thule. It transports the components for a nuclear reactor. However, unlike the prefabricated dwellings, it had not undergone prior testing. The initial assembly and testing will occur upon its arrival at Camp Century. This was also viewed as a pioneering step toward space exploration. The underlying concept was that if a settlement could be established beneath the ice in such a challenging and hostile setting, then establishing a base on the moon or in outer space would also be feasible. This was, in certain respects, science fiction, but it was presented through a tangible project, specifically Camp Century. The vapor container, the largest individual component of the power unit, was transported on a specially designed flat-bottomed sledge constructed solely for this purpose. Everything appeared to be progressing smoothly on the morning the substantial assembly commenced its movement. Regrettably, only a few hours later, one of the most severe storms of the season erupted. Winter conditions re-emerged during the transit, necessitating a race against time to complete all preparations on schedule. September 1960. The personnel at Camp Century are working intensely, with shifts lasting 14 hours. Fortunately, the steel structure for the nuclear reactor is nearing completion. Due to the storm, the heavy apparatus requires more time than anticipated to reach the camp. The 120-mile journey from Thule takes over a week. Its arrival at Camp Century is eagerly awaited. The genuine intention was to lead people to believe that a comfortable existence was possible beneath the ice. It's important to recall this occurred shortly after the Sputnik incident in 1957, when the satellite's passage over the United States led some individuals to believe we were technologically lagging behind the Soviet Union. Consequently, they exerted considerable effort to demonstrate, you understand, that we possessed the necessary technology, that we had with the necessary personnel, we possess everything, and American principles will triumph. However, any testing of the nuclear weapons is off-limits for the Army's camera crew. It's also not mentioned that some soldiers billeted near the reactor are experiencing severe sleep disturbances. Living in close proximity to a nuclear reactor without knowing what might occur is concerning. I believe that's not a very comfortable situation to be in. I mean, they weren't aware of what nuclear power entailed. They imagined a nuclear bomb or something that could detonate at any moment, correct? Therefore, that's why they felt rather uneasy about it. And when they put the nuclear reactor into operation, there was an issue with radiation. So, they took radiation readings inside the tunnel, and this radiation level was far too elevated. It was at an unacceptable level. Consequently, they ceased operations, and this occurred during the winter. Despite this, they requested substantial lead sheets to construct a protective barrier, a sort of lead shield, around it. They recommenced operations, and that was when Soren Gregerson was present. You should question him. In October of 1960, two young gentlemen, both members of the Boy Scouts, arrived in Thule. One of those individuals was Soren. Both had been selected for public relations duties and would spend the upcoming winter as military technical assistants at Camp Century. I truly had no idea what to anticipate. All I understood was that the U.S. Army had constructed it and that a small number of individuals resided there. Soren Gregerson was 18 years old, having just finished high school. His command of English was limited, yet he possessed a strong fascination with nature and physics. He first journeyed to Thule, and subsequently proceeded to Camp Century. Soren was permitted to capture photographs in virtually any location he desired. It sounded thrilling, much like an extension of my scouting experiences. Kent, the American scout, became a close companion to Soren during their duration beneath the ice. Our travel took 24 hours to complete. Even though we rested during the journey, we were quite weary by the time we reached our destination. A sequence of flags, predominantly within Camp Century, marked our path. Here, I have compiled these are the recollections of Camp Century and my personal journal. I captured hundreds of images, and I also received photographs from the U.S. Army. In this particular image, you can observe two scouts positioned at Camp Century amidst the snow. The snow accumulation was immense. A considerable amount of snow surrounded us. My English proficiency was limited to what I learned in school. It was not a strong area on my examination. I have some diary entries from various days, and they were typed out a very, very long time ago. One could say I honed my typing skills in Chemistry Century. I had never operated a typewriter prior to that. So there we have it. It is written in Danish. Monday, December 12, 1960. Breakfast was taken in the reactor vicinity. The swing transport had just arrived at the camp. We were instructed to transport the food down to the primary tunnel. Following our meal, we returned to the control room. I was somewhat in charge. We were told to be safe from radiation danger, and that's the information we received, and I accepted it. I simply accepted that we would be safeguarded and that measurements were being conducted around us to demonstrate that this posed no threat. Sir and Gregerson did not experience any lasting health issues despite his involvement with the radiation testing. To this day, he maintains the belief that the radiation levels surrounding the reactor were secure. Each fuel rod containing 1 pound of uranium-235 was meticulously unpacked and cleaned by hand, a practice that might seem unusual to modern audiences, as does the apparent absence of protective attire. Reactivating the reactor was an exciting event for me. I never felt any apprehension regarding their actions with the reactor. It represented new technology for me, and I was intensely curious about it. The personnel had an on-site bathhouse where they could take hot showers. This was a novel experience for Soren at that particular time. Camp Century requires 10,000 gallons of potable water daily. In doing so, they access what is, for them, an inexhaustible natural supply. Beneath the camp, glacier ice is melted by means of hot steam, forming an subterranean lake. This resource provides drinking water, cools the reactor, and is used for flushing toilets. If one needed to use the restroom at night, it was necessary to exit and put on sufficient clothing to withstand temperatures of -30 degrees. The subterranean facility also includes a contemporary infirmary, along with areas for leisure activities, and a chapel that Soren visited periodically. During my stay, I observed the chaplain functioning as the head of the entire team responsible for the nuclear reactor. He held the rank of captain and was also responsible for spiritual matters. Should the camp require anything, it would be provided within a day or two. Occasionally, whatever fresh produce you desired would be flown in. Indeed, it was delivered, and it boasts the world's largest freezer. Within this space, there is sufficient provisions to sustain the camp for several months. Everything from prime cuts of beef to fruit salad. Saturday, December 24, 1960, marked Christmas Eve. Following breakfast, we worked diligently to remove all the accumulated snow. The tunnel was considerably filled. Afterwards, Dr. Zhivago occupied the remainder of the day. The new book, Dr. Zhivago, was available for reading. The menu lists Christmas fare: chilled tomato beverage with a citrus slice, roasted fowl, a berry condiment, pureed tomatoes, candied tubers, buttered green pods, buttered corn with parsley, a selection of crisp pickled vegetables, an assortment of bread rolls accompanied by butter, spiced squash pastry with cream, or mincemeat pastry, a variety of fresh fruits. In January 1961, a new American president assumes office. John F. Kennedy inherits a challenging situation. He must work to contain the Soviet Union without triggering another global conflict. He pledges to uphold, safeguard, and defend the Constitution of the United States. May divine assistance be mine. May divine assistance be mine. The communist powers have a unique surprise prepared for the newly appointed commander-in-chief. Soviet astronaut Yuri Gagarin achieves the distinction of being the first human to venture into outer space. In April 1961, Gagarin's spacecraft, Vostok 1, successfully completes a single circuit around the Earth. This space voyage lasted for 108 minutes. 108 minutes that fundamentally altered the world. And it became a far grander celebration than the launch of the initial satellite. It was likened to May 9, 1945, the conclusion of World War II. I recall vividly how these vehicles were escorted through the streets with people observing from balconies, windows, and rooftops, followed by the grand reception and fireworks display. It was indeed a magnificent celebration. No comparable celebration occurred subsequently. I do not perceive the initial human in space as an indicator of the free world's decline. However, I do view the comprehensive mobilization of individuals and resources for the benefit of the communist bloc over recent years as a significant source of peril for us. The United States counters this with an extensive initiative to construct submarines. The United States then launches a massive initiative to build submarines. Similarly to the Soviets, they also enhance their nuclear missile capabilities. Their focus is on developing missiles that can be launched from submarines while submerged at sea. Now, the Americans are stepping up to take the lead in this escalating arms race. The United States deploys the Nautilus, which is the world's first nuclear-powered submarine, to the Arctic. Alongside the Navy's advancements, the Air Force introduces its own nuclear missile system, the Minuteman. Furthermore, plans were made for a comparable rocket, named Iceman, to be deployed beneath the ice in Greenland. Before any rockets could be moved to their launch sites, the scientists working at Camp Century had to thoroughly investigate all the associated physical difficulties. To accomplish this, they constructed and tested an underground railway system. Camp Century served as a preliminary project for a far more ambitious endeavor known as Project Iceworm. This larger initiative aimed to excavate thousands of kilometers of tunnels beneath the glacial ice. The purpose was to secretly house nuclear missiles within these underground structures. Soren Gregerson captured 3 photographs of these subterranean railway tracks. These images remain the sole evidence of the highly classified nuclear weapons initiative called Iceworm. There was a distinctly long and large tunnel situated somewhat apart from the others, where they were continuously moving a train carriage back and forth on rails, loading it in one manner, then unloading it differently, operating at varying speeds, performing tests repeatedly. We were considering the possibility of traversing the glacier, connecting one Greenlandic town to another. Camp Century was utilized as a testing ground for numerous projects, encompassing both military and civilian applications. Let's retrieve one of the planet's initial ice core samples, extracted from deep within a glacier. This provides a fascinating record of past climatic conditions. CERN actively participated in many of these experimental trials. U.S. military personnel meticulously studied their Arctic surroundings, even evaluating hovercraft for transportation. At Camp Century, experiments were conducted not only on materials but also on human subjects. It was essentially a social experiment. The U.S. Army undertook psychological research to understand the soldiers' feelings about living in Camp Century under conditions of total isolation and extreme hardship. They were uncertain if the soldiers could endure it or if widespread unrest or social issues would arise. The Army's documentary recordings depicted an idyllic existence beneath the ice. Meanwhile, in the external world, the Cuban Missile Crisis loomed, threatening to ignite another global conflict. In 1962, Soviet vessels transported nuclear missiles to Cuba, positioning them perilously close to American shores. This presented an unprecedented level of danger. The entire nation was placed on a wartime alert, with bomb shelters established in public facilities. Stores, especially those in Florida, were rapidly emptied as citizens engaged in panic buying. The military was at its highest state of readiness, and the president openly declared his intention to wage war against the Soviets. This nation's policy will consider any nuclear missile launched from Cuba targeting any country in the Western Hemisphere as an act of aggression by the Soviet Union against the United States, necessitating a complete retaliatory strike from the Soviet Union. This firm stance caught Khrushchev by surprise. Recognizing his miscalculation, the Soviet leader ordered the recall of his missiles from Cuba. His ships began to return. For Fidel Castro and his Soviet ally, 1962 marked a critical turning point. The fate of Camp Century and Project Iceworm was also uncertain in 1962, but the personnel stationed there would be the last to become aware of these developments. Project Iceworm underwent an assessment by the Department of Defense in 1962 during the Kennedy administration. Despite a favorable review, the Department of Defense ultimately rejected Project Iceworm. After just a few years of operation, Camp Century began to deteriorate rapidly. Despite the insulation efforts, the heat generated by the facilities caused structural damage to the tunnels. The constant movement of the glaciers also contributed to the problem. The accumulating snow could no longer be managed through manual clearing. The ice sheet is not a single, static mass of ice. In reality, it's quite dynamic. It is continuously in motion. It flows from the central part of the ice sheet and makes its way towards the oceans. This movement caused the tunnels at Camp Century to warp and ultimately to crumble. By 1966, the U.S. Army was forced to evacuate Camp Century. Access to the polar ice caps via the road from Thule remained blocked, as did the ice path to the camp, previously marked by flags. While the Army removed their nuclear reactor upon departure, everything else was left behind, destined to be preserved indefinitely beneath the ice. However, in an era of unprecedented climate change, the concept of permanence has vanished. Station North, a Danish military outpost. This location represents the most northerly inhabited point in Greenland. From this base, scientists are studying the ice sheets surrounding the North Pole to understand climate change. Researchers from Germany's Alfred Wegener Institute are analyzing the sea ice, while other teams are focusing on the ice covering the land. Greenland's ice caps are currently melting, with significant global consequences. Yet, this receding ice is also revealing long-buried secrets. Climate projections indicate that the effects of Camp Century might still be felt 50 years after the project was relegated to history. When Camp Century was abandoned, the majority of its radioactive waste, along with other hazardous materials like PCBs and substantial amounts of diesel fuel, remained on site. Scientific predictions suggest that by the end of the current century, the movement of glaciers could transport all this refuse into the bay near Thule. The environmental dangers are extremely serious. Any radioactive waste poses an ecological hazard, regardless of its location on ice or not. Leaving nuclear waste behind is unacceptable. It represents an environmental risk, a threat to global ecology, and a violation of our rights to have our country polluted without our consent. Aleqa Hammond served as the Prime Minister of Greenland and represented her nation in the Danish Parliament. When glaciologists published reports detailing the risks associated with Camp Century, Hammond formally requested more information from the government in Copenhagen. However, instead of receiving answers, she was met with evasions and deliberate obscurity. This situation persists to this day. I believe there is a significant cover-up involved. If it is not a cover-up, then why has it taken so many years for us to obtain any response from Denmark? Why is Denmark not holding the United States accountable for polluting the ice cap in this manner? Why must we expend so much effort, energy, and time trying to get any information from Denmark's foreign ministry? If this situation isn't a cover-up, then what is it? Aleqa Hammond is a strong advocate for Greenland's independence from Denmark. She believes that future generations should not bear the burden of historical contamination. The hazardous remnants of Camp Century must never be permitted to contaminate the food supply. I expect diligent monitoring, comprehensive cleanup efforts, and thorough scientific research to investigate and provide answers to all of Greenland's inquiries. Swiss glaciologist Horst Machgut, alongside Canadian researcher William Colgan, was the first scientist to highlight the environmental dangers posed by Camp Century. In 2017, Denmark yielded to pressure from Greenland and dispatched an international team to conduct an investigation. For contaminating the ice cap in such a manner, why must we put in so much effort, use so much power and time, to get a simple answer from the Danish Foreign Ministry? If this isn't a cover-up, then what else could it be? Aleqa Hammond is a strong advocate for Greenland's independence from Denmark. In her opinion, the upcoming generation ought not to endure the effects of past pollution. The hazardous remnants from Camp Century must never contaminate the global food chain. I anticipate monitoring, I expect cleanup, and I expect scientific studies to investigate and provide answers to all of Greenland's inquiries. Swiss glaciologist Horst Machgut, along with Canadian researcher William Colgan, were the initial scientists to highlight the environmental dangers of Camp Century. Denmark finally yielded to Greenland's demands in 2017, dispatching a global team to look into the situation. The assertions. Gut accompanied the scientists on their journey. A chartered aircraft transports the scientists to the location where Camp Century once existed. They dedicate 2 weeks here, examining the ice surrounding the abandoned location. From overhead, no evidence of the settlement remains visible. The passages and structures are covered by 6 decades of accumulated snow. That's precisely the thrilling aspect. You are situated in this vast, desolate expanse, and beneath your feet lie approximately 10,000 tons of discarded material. During the summer of 2017, the weather conditions only allow for a few days of scientific investigation. Everything remains in place, but due to being situated up to 200 feet underground and covered by at least 100 feet of snow, the landscape is completely level. The landscape is completely level. Penetrating the waste material itself is prohibited. We were required to commit to refraining from drilling into the hazardous waste. In any case, we lacked the necessary equipment for such a task. It would have presented a substantial hazard for us. What is anticipated to transpire over the ensuing 70 years? Could Camp Century emerge from its frozen tomb and find its way into the ocean near Thule? Research indicates that the ice surrounding the camp is indeed experiencing a temperature increase. Yet dangerous levels of radiation have not been detected so far. Further research expeditions and definitive responses from Copenhagen will be necessary, assuming they are ever provided. Although officials have disseminated scientific information online, requests for interviews have been declined, and the leaders of the research mission have been instructed not to discuss their discoveries. Denmark's reticence on this issue signifies that the reality surrounding Camp Century continues to be veiled in mystery. This is also true for the Missile Research Initiative, codenamed Iceworm, which was conducted at the camp, but whose specifics are kept confidential by the U.S. government. Nevertheless, for better or worse, the gradual melting of the polar ice caps will ensure that Camp Century remains in the public consciousness for the foreseeable future. And it represents an accomplishment that should not be disregarded. The initial human settlement ever constructed beneath the ice which successfully achieved its intended purpose, for a period of at least 6 full years.